Imagine a town so poisoned that your own government didn't just close it. It erased it, wiped it from road signs, deleted it from maps, told its own citizens this place no longer legally exists. That town was real. It had a school, a cinema, hospital. Families raised children there for 2 decades. Today, that same government calls it the largest contaminated site in the entire Southern Hemisphere. Not suitable, they say, for any form of human occupation. Not for a house. Not for a tent. Not for a single night. The danger isn't a bomb buried underground. It isn't radiation. It's something far smaller and far harder to escape. It's invisible, it floats. It settles on skin, on food, on children's toys without ever announcing itself. And by the time anyone understood what it was doing to the human body, thousands of people had already breathed it in. Miners, mothers, school teachers, 4-year-olds, playing in what looked like ordinary blue sand. Some of them wouldn't get sick for 40 years. Some wouldn't get sick until they were grandparents. And when the disease finally arrived, there would be no cure, no treatment that reversed it. Only a name doctors would come to dread. This is the story of Wittenoom, Western Australia, a mining town built for profit, sustained by silence, and ultimately abandoned by the very institutions that built it. Government scientists warned about it in writing. Company executives were told repeatedly, and kept the mines running anyway. Children rode their bicycles through it. Families lived inside walls made of it. And somewhere in the gorges of the Hamersley Range, the danger had been waiting for 2.5 billion years for someone to dig it up. How did an ordinary Australian mining town become so dangerous that an entire government decided it should disappear? To understand that, we have to go back to the moment one man picked up a strange blue rock and had no idea what he'd just found. Long before mines, before miners, before the name Wittenoom existed at all, the Hamersley Range was already forming. Roughly 2.5 to 2.4 billion years ago, in the Archean and Proterozoic eras, ancient oceans laid down thick bands of iron and silica across what is now the Pilbara. Geologists call these banded iron formations, layer by layer, buried under pressure and heat. Something else was crystallizing inside them, thin seams of a mineral called crocidolite, blue asbestos. Its chemistry alone explains why it would later become so lethal. Crocidolite is an iron-rich amphibole, its formula packed with sodium and iron. Unlike its cousin, white asbestos, which forms soft, curly fibers, crocidolite grows straight and needle-like in some fibers, thinner than a fraction of a micron, yet strong enough to survive almost anything. This is what would later make it, in the words of medical researchers, the most dangerous asbestos on Earth. But 2.5 billion years passed before anyone knew that. For millennia, this land belonged to the Banjima people, who call the gorge Ngambiguna. They hunted here, gathered ochre, and passed down knowledge of this country for generations. Evidence suggests they even used the vivid blue vein itself as a source of ochre, walking unknowingly beside the very mineral that would one day be declared too dangerous for human contact. Europeans didn't arrive until 1861, when explorer Francis Gregory led an expedition through the region and named the range after his sponsor, Edward Hamersley. For decades afterward, the gorge was simply grazing land, part of Mulga Downs Station, eventually taken up by pastoralist Frank Wittenoom in the 1890s. It was his name the town would one day carry. A young station manager named Lang Hancock grew up on that same land, working for his uncle Sir John Hancock. Through the 1930s, the mines department had actually logged an isolated occurrence of blue asbestos in the Hamersley Range as early as 1917, a footnote, unfollowed, unexplored. Then in 1937, everything changed. Hancock found strange blue rock inside Wittenoom Gorge. He showed it to 2 local prospectors, Izzy Walters and Don and Leonard. With their backing, the men pegged mining leases across Wittenoom Gorge and the neighboring Yampire Gorge. By 1941, small underground tunnels were already being dug by Walters, Leonard, and a partner named Bill Wright. Bags of raw ore were hauled out and shipped to Port Hedland for processing. Production was modest, but it was growing. Nobody digging in 1937 could have known what they were releasing. The rock looked ordinary. The danger was invisible, microscopic, and would take decades to reveal itself. What nobody could have predicted was how fast a sugar company from Sydney would turn this quiet discovery into an entire town. In 1943, a company with zero mining experience walked into Wittenoom Gorge and took over everything. Colonial Sugar Refining Company, CSR, was one of Australia's largest industrial firms. Sugar was their business. Asbestos was not, but CSR believed a booming post-war construction industry would need asbestos cement by the ton, and they weren't willing to miss it. They formed a subsidiary, Australian Blue Asbestos Alte, and bought out the original leases from Walters, Leonard and Wright. By 1948, CSR owned the entire operation outright. Historians would later call the decision doomed from the start. CSR had the money. It didn't have the expertise, and it was about to build an entire town around a mineral it barely understood. That town rose fast. In 1947, CSR constructed Wittenoom, real streets, real houses, a hotel, a general store, a bakery. A post office opened in 1950. The same year, the town was officially gazetted by the government. Both state and federal authorities wanted the Pilbara populated, so subsidies flowed in to help build it. By the 1950s, Wittenoom had become the largest town in the entire Pilbara region. The 1961 census counted 881 residents, 601 men, 280 women, but that number barely captures the scale. Historians estimate that across 2 decades, roughly 20,000 people passed through Wittenoom as workers, wives, children, and visitors. A school opened in 1947. Within 20 years, it had grown to around 100 pupils. There was a cinema, a hospital staffed by company nurses and doctors, sports grounds, an RSL club, dance halls. Teacher Helen Osborne, who lived there in the 1970s, would later remember it fondly. Wittenoom was once a town for families and had a busy school. We just had a marvelous time. Men worked as miners, millers, and truck drivers, earning wages that were high for the era. Women ran the shops, the school, the hospital. Children rode bicycles through empty desert streets, played in schoolyards, and grew up believing this was simply home. But every evening the miners came back from their shifts caked in a fine blue dust. It clung to their overalls, their hair, their boots. They carried it home without a second thought, and to chairs, into beds, into the arms of the children waiting for them. One former child resident put it plainly years later. We were never told. We would not have gone there if we'd known. Nobody had told them, because at that point, almost nobody outside the mine itself understood exactly what that dust was doing, or how far it had already spread. The real danger wasn't in the tunnels underground. It had already walked into people's homes. Deep inside Wittenoom Gorge, men worked with jackleg drills and hand picks, cutting through hard quartzite rock following narrow seams of blue fiber. The work was brutal and the tunnels were tight. Blasting opened up the harder sections. In 1957, Australian Blue Asbestos-related expanded operations to a second site, Colonial Gorge at the old Yampire lease, doubling the scale of extraction. Once the ore reached the surface, it was crushed and fed into rotoclone dryers to remove moisture. Then came the part almost no modern safety inspector would recognize. Workers hand-picked raw fiber from the crushed rock, sorting it by touch and packed it into jute bags. There were no bagging machines, no sealed systems, just men, dust, and bare hands. Ventilation was minimal. Early tunnels relied on natural airflow. It wasn't until complaints mounted in the 1950s that a small exhaust fan was finally installed. The numbers tell the rest. In 1951, a rough smoke pen reading inside the mill recorded dust levels exceeding 1,000 particles per cubic centimeter against a contemporary safety limit of 6. By 1966, a health survey found mill concentrations above 100 fibers per milliliter, a figure that dwarfs any modern exposure standard. WA's own Commissioner of Health warned at the time that the hazard from asbestos is considerably greater than that from silica, yet attention has been inadequate. Miners worked without real protection. Some wore simple headcloths. Many wore nothing at all. Every ton of rock mined yielded only a small percentage of usable fiber. The rest of fine, contaminated waste powder was dumped in growing piles around the gorges. And then someone made a decision that would haunt Wittenoom for the rest of its existence. That waste, those tailings, were used to pave the town's roads, footpaths, and even the airport runway. Blue asbestos became the literal ground beneath residents' feet. Production climbed steadily. In 1937, the operation had produced just 14 tons of raw fiber. By 1957, that number had exploded to 11,000 tons a year. By the time the mine finally closed in 1966, Wittenoom had shipped roughly 61,000 tons of crocidolite to asbestos cement. Factories and textile plants across the United Kingdom, the United States, Japan, and Europe. CSR would later cite falling market prices as the reason for closure, but lawsuits over worker health had already been mounting for years before that final decision was made. None of the men hauling ore out of those tunnels could see what they were actually breathing. The fibers were far too small, thinner than a human hair could ever be, invisible even under normal light, so somewhere between the drill, the dust, and the lungs of every miner in that gorge, a question was already forming that no one in Wittenoom yet had the tools to answer. What was this invisible dust actually doing to the people breathing it in? And how long would it take before anyone found out? A single crocidolite fiber can be less than 3 micrometers thick, a fraction of what the human eye can detect, and yet several millimeters long, invisible, weightless, enough to drift on a breath of wind. And once airborne, these needle-like fibers behave nothing like ordinary dust. When inhaled, they don't simply settle in the throat or get coughed away. They travel deep into the lungs, lodging in the tiny alveoli or piercing straight into the pleural lining, the thin membrane surrounding the lungs themselves. The body tries to fight back. Immune cells called macrophages surround each fiber, attempting to break it down and clear it away. But crocidolite doesn't break down. It's biopersistent, meaning it can remain lodged in lung tissue for the rest of a person's life, causing continuous low-grade inflammation year after year. There's another layer to the danger, one tied directly to the mineral's chemistry. Crocidolite is unusually rich in iron. That iron reacts inside the body, generating free radicals, unstable molecules that damage DNA over time. It's a slow cellular level assault that can eventually trigger cancer. And the timeline is almost unbelievable. Disease from asbestos exposure typically doesn't appear for 30 to 50 years after the fibers first entered the lungs. A miner exposed in his 20s might not develop symptoms until his 60s or 70s, decades after he'd left Wittenoom behind entirely. 3 diseases in particular would come to define Wittenoom's legacy. Asbestosis, a severe scarring of lung tissue from years of heavy dust exposure. Lung cancer, especially deadly when combined with smoking. And mesothelioma, a rare, aggressive cancer of the lung or abdominal lining almost exclusively linked to asbestos exposure, with no other common cause. Research would later show crocidolite may be 3 to 5 times more carcinogenic, fiber for fiber, than the white asbestos mined elsewhere in the world. Perhaps the most unsettling finding of all, there is no safe threshold. Medical researchers have stated plainly that there is no safe level of asbestos. Exposure and any contact, however brief, raises the lifetime risk of mesothelioma. A single afternoon in the dust wasn't guaranteed to cause disease. But it wasn't guaranteed to be safe either. At the time, almost none of this was understood by the people living in Wittenoom. Residents who'd heard rumors of danger reassured each other with a phrase that would later sound almost cruel in hindsight. "One puff won't kill you." Some of them were wrong. And by the late 1940s, one government doctor was already trying to warn everyone who would listen. Why did the first official warning about Wittenoom, written years before most residents even arrived, get ignored for almost 2 decades? In 1948, a government medical officer named Dr. Eric Saint walked through Wittenoom's mill and wrote something that should have stopped everything. He predicted that mill workers would very likely contract chest disease within months of exposure. His written warning went further than that. He called it, in his own words, the potential for the greatest case of asbestosis the world has ever seen. He sent letters to the mines department, urging immediate dust suppression. Nothing changed. By 1951, internal test readings inside the mill were already coming back off scale, numbers too high for the equipment to properly register. Workers were reporting something they called dust blindness. 4 years later, in 1955, the WA chief inspector of mines grew alarmed enough to threaten the mine with closure over dangerously high fiber counts. The threat didn't hold. In 1959, WA Health Commissioner Dr. Jim McNulty personally inspected the mine. What he saw convinced him it should be shut down entirely on health grounds. He said so officially to the government he worked for. The mine kept running for another 7 years. Meanwhile, evidence was quietly accumulating in Perth's hospitals and laboratories. In 1962, doctors published the first lung biopsies taken from former Wittenoom miners, physical proof of what was happening inside their chests. By 1965, pathologists in Perth were identifying cases of mesothelioma directly traceable back to Wittenoom exposure. CSR's response, according to later reviews, was to downplay the risk publicly while assuring authorities that dust controls were improving. A 1992 medical review would later look back on the entire episode and call it bluntly what it was: a modern industrial disaster. The gap between warning and action is almost hard to comprehend. Dr. Saint's first letter was written in 1948. The mine didn't close until 1966. 18 years passed between the first official warning and the moment operations actually stopped. And even then, the mine's closure was attributed publicly to falling asbestos prices, not health concerns. It would take years more before the true scale of the damage became visible, because the people most affected weren't just the miners standing in the dust. They were the families waiting for them at home, and nobody had warned them at all. So who was actually responsible for building an entire company town around a hazard its own government scientists had already condemned in writing? CSR didn't just mine Wittenoom's asbestos. CSR built the houses people slept in, the school their children attended, the hospital meant to keep them alive, and internal company memos, later surfaced through litigation, would show that CSR's own management understood dust was a serious problem. By the 1950s, in the same decade, Dr. McNulty was calling for the mine to close. Publicly, the company's messaging stayed focused on economic opportunity, jobs, exports, a booming post-war market for asbestos cement. Health concerns, when they were addressed at all, were framed as manageable. They weren't. The reckoning came slowly, and it came through the courts. In 1988, a landmark case, Rabinault v. CSR, was won by the widow of a former miner. It legally established what residents had suspected for decades. CSR bore responsibility for the disease spreading through its former workforce and their families. 6 years later, in 1994, a bipartisan WA parliamentary committee issued a blunt conclusion. The companies responsible for Wittenoom, it stated, should clean up the widespread contamination they'd created. CSR's successors have not seriously contested liability. Compensation funds have been established over the years for victims and their families. But responsibility for compensation and responsibility for cleanup turned out to be two very different things. When Wittenoom's town site was finally formally shut down in 2007, something remarkable and damning was true. Not a single shovel load of asbestos waste had been removed by the companies that created it. Decades of legal accountability had produced compensation checks. It had not produced a clean gorge. That failure would echo for another 2 decades. In 2026, the Banjima traditional owners, the same people who had called this land Gambigunha for thousands of years before Frank Wittenoom's name was ever attached to it, and filed a lawsuit against the WA government demanding a full multi-billion-dollar cleanup, citing CSR's original role as part of the ongoing injustice. But long before any lawsuit, long before any parliamentary inquiry, there were simply people, miners, wives, teachers, children, living inside a hazard nobody had told them about. And some of their stories were only just beginning. What happened to the children who grew up playing in what looked like ordinary blue sand? And how long did it take before anyone realized what that sand actually was? Wittenoom's tailings weren't just dumped in remote piles. They were spread across schoolyards, sports ovals, and sand pits because it was free, plentiful, and nobody in charge understood what it actually was. A photograph from 1957 shows 2 4-year-olds, Philip Noble and Ross Munro, laughing on top of a tailings heap as if it were a sand dune. Both boys died in their 30s of mesothelioma. They never worked a single shift in the mine. A long-term study tracking 460 children who lived in Wittenoom before the age of 15 found the numbers. By 2009 were staggering. Girls who'd lived there showed all-cause mortality rates, 20 to 47% higher than the WA average. For boys, it was 50 to 83% higher. Among that group of former child residents, researchers documented 215 separate cancer cases in 207 individuals, many of them mesotheliomas appearing in patients' 40s and 50s. Teacher Helen Osborne, who once described Wittenoom as the happiest time of her life, later carried a darker truth as well. 5 of her former students had died of mesothelioma. "My husband was exposed, our children were exposed," she said. But we didn't know of the dangers for most of that time. Resident Valma Mlodowski, who lost her infant daughter Tanya to respiratory disease, put it even more starkly. Asbestos affected everybody from the youngest child to the oldest person. By the numbers, the full scope of Wittenoom's toll is difficult to comprehend. Roughly 20,000 people lived or worked there between 1943 and 1966. By 2024, an estimated 2,000 or more had died from asbestos-related disease. The miners, millers, wives, children, visitors. Government action, when it finally came, arrived in fragments. In 1978, WA authorities began recommending residents relocate. The school held on until 1985, closing when only a handful of children remained enrolled. Through the 1990s and 2000s, families left one by one. By 2015, only 6 residents remained. By 2018, 2. In September 2022, the last person was gone, and Wittenoom's population reached 0, permanently by law. In March 2007, the WA government had already formally degazetted the town site, stripping Wittenoom of its legal existence and ordering its name removed from road signs and maps entirely. Miner Peter Holdsworth, who survived a 1963 tunnel collapse and remembered the dust was that dense he could see nothing, later became one of the public voices calling for accountability. Lawyer Peter Gordon, who represented many victims in court, described walking the site himself. "I stepped onto blue asbestos fiber. It's still there, it's never been cleaned up." He wasn't exaggerating. Estimates for a genuine cleanup now range from $100 to $600 million, and as of 2022, WA's own lands minister admitted that even with remediation, Wittenoom may never be entirely safe. For the Banjima people, whose connection to Ngambiguntha predates the mine by thousands of years, the wound is different, but no less permanent. Elder Maitland Parker described it as a death sentence on anyone trying to connect with country. Spokesperson John L. Parker put it simply, "They've disconnected us from that place of country that we can't visit anymore." Today, the roads into Wittenoom are barricaded. The utilities are cut. The Department of Biodiversity's official guidance offers no ambiguity. There is no reason to visit. 3 million tons of blue tailings remain exactly where they were left. Drive north from Perth for nearly 1,400 kilometers, and eventually the bitumen gives way to gravel, and the gravel leads to a barricade. Beyond it, empty streets, collapsed fences, and blue-tinted soil stretching toward the gorge. No residents, no power, no water, officially no town at all. The government erased Wittenoom from its maps in 2007, but erasing a name from a map doesn't erase what happened there, and it certainly doesn't erase what remains in the ground. 3 million tons of tailings still sit across roughly 46,000 hectares of contaminated land in what authorities now call the largest contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere. So, how did an ordinary Australian mining town become so dangerous that an entire government decided it should disappear? Not through a single catastrophic accident, not through a single act of cruelty. It happened through a slower, more human failure, a chain of decisions made by people who prioritized production over precaution, profit over protection, silence over warning. Dr. Eric Saint wrote his prediction in 1948. The mine didn't close until 1966. 18 years sat between the warning and the response, and in that gap, an entire generation breathed air the government's own doctors had already condemned. The fibers responsible are still there. Some are lodged in the lungs of survivors now in their 70s and 80s, waiting, as they have for decades, to become disease. Others remain scattered across a gorge that traditional owners have called home for thousands of years, longer than any mine existed. Wittenoom's school is gone. Its hospital is gone. Its last resident left in 2022, closing a chapter that began with one man showing a strange blew rock to two prospectors in 1937. What hasn't left is the dust. It doesn't make headlines anymore. It doesn't appear on road signs or satellite maps or tourist brochures. But somewhere in that gorge, sealed in soil, the wind still moves. Wittenoom's real legacy remains, not a memory but a substance. Still present. Still capable of doing exactly what it has always done. Some places are dangerous because of what happened there. Wittenoom is dangerous because of what's still there. If you want more stories the world tried to forget, subscribe and stay for the next one.